Hi, this is Austin Brentley, creator of the Chord Genome project, and you're listening to the Musicality podcast.
Ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Hi, this is Christopher, founder of Musical U, and welcome to the Musicality podcast. One of the main skills we teach at Musical U is the ability to recognize chords by ear in music. This is a really cool skill to have, whether you play chords yourself, like on guitar or piano, or you want to improvise over them, like on sax or trumpet, or you're a songwriter or composer, or even just a music fan who wants to better understand the harmonies in the music you love. The approach we teach is based on taking advantage of the fact that there are certain theory concepts and rules, which mean that particular chords go together in music, and certain sequences of chords are more common than others in the music we hear every day. That, combined with the fact that the ear doesn't much care what key it's hearing music in, allows you to very rapidly learn to recognize the chords in a large number of songs by ear without needing to master each and every possible chord and combination. So it's no surprise that this idea of the 1, 4, 5, and 6 chords and how powerful they can be has come up several times on the Musicality podcast before, and we've even dedicated a whole episode to it. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Today I'm joined by Austin Brentley, the man behind a fantastic new website which, among other things, allows you to immediately find out what songs use certain chords. There are a ton of cool applications of this idea, including taking the set of chords you know how to play and finding a bunch more songs you'll be able to play right away with just those chords. Figuring out what one chord you should learn next to open up even more songs for you to play. And providing an easy middle step to learning to recognize chord progressions by ear using the songs you know and love. It was really cool to get to talk with Austin and learn where this project came from and how people are using it. And aside from those ideas I just mentioned, I'm sure you're going to come away inspired with some ways it could be useful for you in your musical life. My name is Christopher Sutton, and this is the Musicality podcast from Musical U. Welcome to the show, Austin. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Christopher.
So I have been enamored with the Chord Genome project ever since our team came across it, and I'm really looking forward to talking to you about that. But I want to begin at the beginning and understand where this project came from. And for yourself, what was the journey of learning music like?
Okay. Well, the project originally began as just a tool to help me find easy 3-chord songs. I was basically tired of playing Three Little Birds and Knocking on Heaven's Door and the ones you keep seeing again and again when you search online. And then somewhere along the way, I think Axis of Awesome came out with the 4-chord song. It's a viral video where they stitched together all these pop tunes. And so I realized that there are tons of tunes out there, and it's just a matter of finding them. And so I started on creating a search engine that could help me easily find, at that time, 3-chord songs.
Nice. And let's rewind the clock a little bit. What were you playing these 3-chord songs on, and what had you been doing up until this point to know that 3-chord songs were even a thing?
Well, I've had a guitar pretty much my entire adult life. Every time I change countries, I get a new old guitar from the pawn shop, and consistently it just languishes there because I'd pick out a tune. I really did enjoy like bossa nova music or early rock and roll. Bossa nova was way out of my league, like a one-note samba. Do you know that?
Mm-hmm. The Ella Fitzgerald, yeah.
Yeah, so that's, I was always punching above my weight. But even with early rock and roll songs, the progress just didn't materialize, and because you're trying to bring together all these unfamiliar chords all at once. And if you stop early before you finish that song, you don't get anything. So a lot of wasted effort, and then, you feel, defeated, or I felt defeated.
I can certainly relate to that. I think the traditional methods for learning guitar are very much, let's throw all of the chords at you as quickly as possible. Whether you're learning with a teacher or through a method book, I think that chord overwhelm hits a lot of early guitar players.
Sure.
Were you teaching yourself? Were you studying with a teacher? When did you begin guitar?
Well, I probably began around 18. I'm 40 now. There weren't a whole lot of online resources at the time, but that really wasn't the problem. Like there were books, and if I had been more dedicated, I could have done it. But what often happens is that the songs that inspire you to rush out and get a guitar are usually out of your league, or out of my league anyway. And so it was the same cycle again and again. Okay, I'm going to do it this time. I'd sit down with the guitar, and a week or two later, I'd give up in frustration.
Gotcha. And what kind of family background had you grown up with? Were you someone who was expected to learn an instrument? Was this a total tangent for you compared with what your family were expecting? Or
my family is a very musical family. My parents met in conservatory. My grandparents taught like violin, viola, piano for years in the DC metro area, which is where I'm from. My brother's a performer. So everybody was expected to study an instrument. I studied flute and piano. I did okay, but it didn't really click. But when I started to travel more, the guitar just made a lot more sense, and that really didn't click. And I thought it would be easier because I'm not soloing; I'm just strumming chords. I was wrong.
Well, this is something I want to definitely dig into in this episode, because I think it's kind of crazy that piano and guitar are thought of as kind of the default instruments for people to learn in a lot of cases, because they are two of the hardest instruments for a beginner to learn, if you ask me. And, guitar, yes, you sit there and strum, but there's a lot of independent left-hand, right-hand stuff going on. And as we've touched on there, often the method you're following or the songs you want to play are expecting an awful lot of expertise from you quite early on in the journey. Right. So I'm sure a lot of our listeners who have tried guitar or even struggled through and become guitar players can relate to what you've been describing there.
Yeah, I think it's there are some people who are just naturals and they really don't understand what I'm talking about. But I would suspect that the majority of people out there have tried the guitar. It's just a friend's guitar lying around, and the majority of those people are not playing a year later. So
yeah, I've often thought that if learning guitar wasn't about learning one new chord every week and one song for each new chord, but instead was about learning 3 chords and then 100 songs using those chords, we might have a lot more continued guitar playing than we do. A lot fewer people giving up in the first 6 months. So on that note, how did things change for you? You were it sounds like you were pretty persistent, buying a guitar each place you moved and strumming away, having these bursts of enthusiasm. Were there any insights or breakthroughs that let you get away from that frustration?
Well, in building this platform, just basically, I kept discovering even more and more 3-chord songs. Even songs that aren't normally considered 3-chord tunes are playable with 3 simple chords, like "Leaving on a Jet Plane" or I'm a Believer" by the Monkees, which is the first tune that I could call my own. And basically, I kept building a larger and larger repertoire. And once you have those 3 chords, it's just a matter of polishing off these new tunes, because they're slightly different tempos and melodies, but still fundamentally the same song. Well, not the same songs, but they use the same chords. And it was just a much easier journey.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about that, because the idea of 3-chord songs has come up on the show several times before as a really neat way into playing chords by ear in particular. And when we say 3-chord song, often we're kind of assuming it's going to be the 1, 4, and 5 chords. But I believe with the Chord Genome project, you're not necessarily assuming that, right? When you say 3-chord song, you literally mean just a song that uses 3 different chords.
Correct. The greatest number of songs are going to be ones that use C, G, and D, or C, F, and G, the same relationship. But there are thousands of chords in the database. And just so we're clear, like when you click on a song in the search engine, you're directed to an offsite location, Ultimate Guitar, for example. So we're really just indexing songs that are out there in the world. They're not hosted locally, but there are 3-chord songs that use minors, 7 chords, and the platform is flexible enough that if any chords you type in, you're probably going to see results.
So why was this important for your learning? I think people listening can probably understand that, if it's just 3 chords, that's a relatively easy song. But was there more to it than that? Was there more to this idea of thinking really about the chords used in the song when picking your next song to learn?
Well, actually, what kept me going is that the more people I told about this idea to, like they were like, that actually makes a lot of sense. There should be a search engine like that. And so that kept me going at a time when I was pouring money and time in, but not getting anything back yet. In fact, every hour spent building this was an hour not playing. So it really was kind of a big investment. But that kept me going, like the feedback I got from friends and family.
Cool. And so let's pause for a moment and think about that decision point. So you'd been learning guitar, you'd been doing these bursts of enthusiasm. It had been a bit frustrating because it felt like every new song you were kind of trying to take on the world. And you gradually realized that actually you could leverage the fact that often there were chords in common across songs, and you started to pick songs based on that, right?
Right.
And at some point you thought, I could build something to figure out these songs for me? Or at what point did you think, this way of learning guitar is really working a lot better?
Well, so at the time, it wasn't actually for learning. It was just for growing my repertoire. And then a buddy asked me, well, I'm starting from scratch. I don't want to do 3 chords. If I just learn 1 chord, what chord should that be? And from that came a new feature. So basically, we had all these songs indexed, organized by the chords they used. And with that data, you can determine what chord to add next, no matter what your level is. And that chord should be whatever one allows you to play the most new music, the most new songs. And so we built this tool. It's called the Next Best Chord feature, and it looks at what the chords and then it recommends. So if you know GCD, for example, it would recommend that you learn E minor next, because adding that 1 chord allows you to play. I mean, we're talking about going from about 4,000 songs to 12,000 songs just by adding a new chord.
Amazing. And that comes back to what we were mentioning there, the 1-4-5 and 1-4-5-6. You're adding that 6th chord. And because so many songs use these kinds of progressions, your database knows these are the 8,000 extra songs that suddenly you can play.
Exactly. And if your starting point is C, F, and G, then A minor would almost certainly be the next best chord to learn. So it's adaptive. Like no matter what chords including 0, it can tell you, well, if you're going to learn 1 chord, learn this one.
Very cool. So that is a really practical way to take what was kind of a search engine and a database and turn it into a learning tool, something that can really help people enjoy learning guitar, or I guess any instrument that plays chords faster. Is that right?
Yes. That's basically, once we had these 2 components built, that was the natural leap. Basically, starting from 0, you keep adding 1 chord at a time, which is much easier than trying to assemble 5 unfamiliar chords. And just with that 1 chord, once you get it down, an entire universe of new songs become available. In fact, you use those new songs to get better at that 1 chord, which is tough in the very beginning, but with practice, it gets easier and easier, and then you're ready for the next new chord.
Nice. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions that I think might be on our listeners' minds at this point. And the first is, can you really play any songs with just 1 chord when you were telling your friend what 1 chord to learn?
Yeah, but basically any song that you can, well, don't quote me on this, but any song you can sing in the round, like Row Your Boat or I guess Frere Jacques, probably is playable with 1 chord. So like those are 2 songs that you can definitely play with a single chord. And there's a song out there called the 1 Chord Song by Keith Urban. I'd never heard of it. all playable with any major chord that you want.
Very cool. And so the other question they might have been thinking was at the other end of things, supposing you've got 3 or 4 chords under your belt, or maybe half a dozen, and this search engine is telling you thousands and thousands of songs you can play with those chords. That's exciting, but it's also a bit overwhelming, right?
It is.
So how do you turn that into something manageable and something that actually gives you a clear next step?
Okay, well, so it's not an elegant solution, partly because it's so hard to find the information out there, but the site comes with genre and decade filters. So if you like rock music from the 50s and 60s, you'd apply those filters and you'd get a list of maybe 100 or so songs that use G, C, and D from that. But it's still highly experimental because songs get re-released every single year. And so trying to find the earliest release date is not easy. And trying to find like the most popular genre assigned to, so like Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash, it's been on soundtracks, probably Christmas albums, pop albums, rock albums, even though it's undeniably a country song. So anybody who uses the platform, like, understand that those filters are super duper beta, but they do help because thousands of songs is overwhelming.
For sure. From my background in kind of digital music and kind of combining science and music, I have friends who've worked for Last.fm and Music Brains and the BBC, and I've kind of seen a glimpse behind the curtains of how hellish that metadata problem can be.
Yes.
Taking a single song and, it's what's obvious to a human that Ring of Fire is a country track by Johnny Cash actually can be incredibly hard to pull out from the haystack of data you find online.
Yeah, in fact, I've used both Last.fm and Music Brains, and it's tough to navigate. But until I find a better solution, those filters are here to stay.
Nice. Well, it certainly does the trick. And there were a couple of reasons I and the others on the Musical U team were really excited to discover this project. I think for me, it was partly just that geeky appreciation of the challenge you've taken on and how simple you've made it for the user. Because behind the scenes, I know there's a crazy amount of implementation and analysis and kind of problem solving that needs to happen. But from the user's perspective, it's as simple as you've described it. You type in the chords, you hit search, you do some filtering if you want, and you get back the answers. Yeah. Super cool. So that geeky appreciation was definitely there. But I also... it really scratched an itch for us because we teach a lot about how to recognize chords by ear. And we talk about 3-chord songs and 4-chord songs and describe it as kind of the shortcut method where, if you learn to recognize just a handful of chords or chord progressions by ear, it opens up all of these songs to you compared with if you're trying to take on all of the major and minor chords at once. And so part of the challenge for us is always, how can we give people practice tracks or practice examples to work with? And so your website is a fantastic resource for that. And I'd certainly encourage any listeners, aside from using it as intended and clicking through to see the chord chart on ultimateguitar.com or wherever it comes from, just that initial search can be a really useful training tool. So if you know you can play C, F, and G, do the search, skim down the list of songs, find one you know, and then just sit down and try and figure out the chord progression by ear. Where do the chords change? Which is it changing to the 4 or the 5? That's a really fantastic exercise. And you've skipped that really, I was about to say dangerous, that's overstating it, but that potential pitfall of trying to figure out your random song on the radio and not realizing it's using all kinds of weird chords that you've got no chance of recognizing by ear. So that selection process is a really helpful thing for ear training, I think.
Yeah, I can actually speak to that. Like the more that I play, like sometimes a song will come on the radio. Like I have a 2.5-year-old and Under the Sea, the Disney tune from Little Mermaid. It's like, that I think I can play that with 3 chords and it's not an official version. Like Disney would not pay me money to perform it, but it's playable with 3 chords. And I've heard that song 1,000 times. It never occurred to me, and I think just as a result of playing more and more, I'm making those connections that you're talking about.
That's great. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording, and you were saying how you'd kind of brushed up on music theory along the way to build this project. And I think what you just described, we should dwell on for a second, because I think everyone knows the guitar player who has memorized 300 songs and played for a decade, but can't play by ear at all. So it's certainly possible to immerse yourself and not develop your ear in that way. But you, I think, because you have the theory knowledge and this appreciation of what's going on musically, you've been able to kind of leverage that immersion to actually develop the ear skills, it sounds like.
It's it's an organic and slow process, but I'm getting there. Like I'm picking up music theory tidbits along the way, and like I wouldn't hold me up as an example to the world, but where I was and where I am now, for me, is a huge difference.
Yes, and I had assumed when encountering this project and discovering that you were the guy behind it, I'd assumed you must be a programmer and amateur musician like myself who had kind of put this together in his spare time and it was growing into something bigger. But that's not the case. Tell us a little bit about what it took to build the Chord Genome project.
Well, I mean, an endless search of developers around the globe. Like, and this is in year 4 now, but I'm not a coder at all, and trying to explain what it is I want to do to a developer who is a genius at code but doesn't know music theory necessarily. It's been a struggle, but I eventually found one who admittedly doesn't know much music theory, but we've covered a lot of ground together. And so I explain what new feature I want to add, and he's able to implement it. And I'm happy now.
And have there been any particular challenges along the way, apart from trying to communicate this to coders who maybe don't get the music theory or quite understand where you're coming from? Have there been any hurdles to overcome?
Oh, every day there's like a new challenge that I didn't see in advance. But like one of the big ones early on was the need to standardize chords in the back end. So you can spell, for example, A major many different ways, just by itself, a capital A, or A with a big M, A major, with and without spaces. But all those are fundamentally the same chord, and so they have to be stored as one value so that a user who searches any of those spellings will see songs that use any of those spellings. And then we have to do the same thing with all the other chord families, the minors, diminished, etc., and also within harmonics. So once we had indexed most of the songs we were going to use, they were probably, I think, 50,000 different chords.
Wow.
But after standardization, there are 2,000 unique chords, 2,100 or so. And as a result of standardization.
Interesting. I guess that comes back a bit to that point that what seems obvious to a human is actually quite complex from a machine's point of view. A human who's studied a bit of theory knows that a capital A means the same thing as A with a capital M next to it. That's how chord charts work. But to a machine, those are two completely different things.
Yes. Oh, I have other challenges. Like I could fill up an entire podcast with the. But so we're still in beta, and it probably for a while. Like another thing that the songs that we index to, they're on user submitted websites like Ultimate Guitar, which are fantastic resources. But anybody can edit or remove songs, so what we've indexed today won't necessarily be how the song looks tomorrow. So it's a constantly moving target, and so I'd like to figure out a way to show users more accurate results. And you can sometimes, I guess, resuscitate a song if you use. Are you familiar with archive.org?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it takes snapshots of the internet, but I really don't want to use that approach. I want to be able to send the traffic to these websites because they've put together amazing resources. So that's another challenge right there.
Fantastic. So you mentioned there how there are 2,000 or 2,100 unique chords that your database knows about. And again, I think the listener might be thinking, that sounds crazy.
Yes.
I've just learned my first 3 chords. How do I get from there to 2,000? Can you speak to that at all? And, if and how someone needs to learn those 2,000 chords?
Okay, so there are about 350,000 songs in the current index, and you need 2,000 chords to be able to play all of those songs. And we actually ran the process starting from the first chord and with each new chord, you're able to play a slightly higher percentage of the database. But what we discovered is once you're at chord number 23, you can play 50% of the songs in this database, it just blew my mind that thousands of songs, thousands of chords needed to play everything, but with just 23 chords, you can play the majority of songs. And like this index is no slouch. It's a pretty representative cross section of songs from genres all over the globe and users from around the world submitting songs they like. So there's pop and rock and jazz and folk and from all different decades. So by extension, in theory, you could play roughly 50% of all English language popular music with, it might not be exactly 23 chords, but it would be absurdly low.
Amazing. And to be clear, we're not even talking about transposing things into a convenient key, are we? Like, you're talking about playing these songs in the key they were written in.
Well, yes. Like once you land on the page, as written, without any transposing. If you did transpose, I mean, it'd probably be 80, 90%. If you transposed all those 23 chords up and down, well, I guess 11 times. But with 23, you can do a lot of damage with just 23 chords. And so like I actually wrote a blog post, the 23 chord challenge, where it's ambitious if you learn one chord a week. I don't know if I could do that, one chord a week on the guitar, but if you learn one chord a week, then in less than 6 months, you'd be able to play roughly 50% of the songs out there, which is kind of a cool concept.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And we'll definitely put a link to that blog post in the show notes, because I think whether or not you want to embark on this challenge or indeed use the database to guide you in it, I think that analysis alone is super fascinating because, we talked a bit about how guitar method books often just throw everything at you. And I don't want to overstate it, but I think often they're a bit misguided in their choice of chords. And, a lot of musicians are left thinking, okay, first I have to learn all the major chords and then all the minor chords, and that's 24 chords right there.
Right.
And, it's not the case that the 23 chords you just mentioned are all of the major and minor chords by any stretch.
No.
So I think if nothing else, everyone listening to this should go check out that blog post and see for yourself, what are those 23 chords that unlock half of the music to you? And do a little bit of theory work yourself. If you're familiar with the idea of a 1-4-5 or a 1-4-5-6, just look at that chart that Austin has put together and ask yourself, why are they these chords? Why are these the ones that artists and musicians and songwriters have used again and again?
Yeah, there are a lot of 7 chords. If you just did majors and minors, which is an intuitive approach, you're leaving a lot of songs on the table.
So that's a great exercise. Austin, you are a really interesting blend of music and tech with this project. And I certainly am a big believer in how technology can make it fun and easy to learn music in a way that's never been possible before. Aside from the Chord Genome project, have you come across anything that can help our listeners learn faster or enjoy learning more compared with the traditional approaches?
Yeah, actually. Like the purists out there might hate this. My dad, a flute teacher, definitely hates this idea. But I use it's a metronome. My phone is off for the podcast, but it's a metronome that speeds up, is imperceptibly, but like it slowly speeds up with time, forcing you to play faster and faster. But like you don't really notice it, and then every now and then, like I'll stop the metronome and then go back 50% of the way, make it 50% slower than where I stopped, and then I start it again. So because I'm taking a step back, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is unbelievably slow, but it's much faster than where I started. So that has helped me a lot. Again, my dad hates it. He's all about standard time, but I would definitely check that out. There are apps like that for Apple and Android as well.
Terrific. That I love that tip. I am kind of half-heartedly, well, enthusiastically, but without a lot of practice time, learning drums at the moment. So I have a pair of drumsticks on my desk, and
cool.
I've been following a few tutorials that like, try it at 60 BPM and then try it at 70 and blah, 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 which is fine, but it's kind of tedious to stop and start like that. So I love that idea of, speeding, both the idea of gradually speeding up and having a metronome that'll do it automatically for you, and that reset to 50% of the speed so you can enjoy that moment of, oh, this is kind of easy now.
Exactly. It kind of reminds me of the mood lighting that restaurants use, where over the course of 15 minutes or half an hour, the lights become a little bit brighter, and then all of a sudden it gets dark and romantic, but it just goes on an infinite cycle, just doing that again and again.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Huh. I have never I've noticed it getting suddenly darker, but I've never known they were doing the cycle.
Yep.
That's fascinating. I'm going to watch for that next time I eat out. Very cool. Wonderful. Austin, it's been such a pleasure to talk with you. Can you tell people where they should go to try out the Chord Genome project?
Okay. So the chordgenome.com, or you can go to the chordgenomeproject.com. I think by the time this podcast airs, we'll have a search page up that doesn't require any login, or just head over to the search page. And then if you'd like to see even more results, there are paid versions, obviously. But if anybody does use the site, please do not be shy with feedback like that. If you ever face a problem, others might as well. And so it helps me make it better and better. So try before you buy. And I hope it helps the listeners out there.
Amazing. I'm sure it will. I think, we talked about checking out that blog post purely for a great insight into chord progression theory and the most useful chords. We talked about using it as a way to guide you in learning guitar or piano and what chords to learn next, and also purely to get more fun and repertoire out of the chords you already know. And I definitely recommend that ear training exercise too, where you look up what songs use a certain set of chords, and then you just sit down with your instrument and try and figure out for yourself how the progression goes. So this is an amazing tool to have at your disposal. Big thank you and commendations to Austin for putting it together, because I know it can't have been easy, and I think this is going to become a really widely used and valuable tool for musicians. So Austin, a big thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you very much, Christopher. It was a pleasure.
The Musicality Podcast is brought to you by Musical U. Learn more at musical-u.com.
Okay, you've probably already run off to put chordgenome.com into your browser and give it a whirl. But if you are still listening, let's do a recap. Austin comes from a highly musical family, with his parents and grandparents all being musicians and music teachers. So learning music came early for him, but he definitely didn't find it came easy. And although he kept at it, always buying a guitar when moving to a new country, he didn't feel like it ever really clicked. He'd go through bursts of enthusiasm and determination, but it always felt like a big challenge to learn a new song that he was inspired to try to play. He pointed out that often the songs we want to play are actually pretty complicated, and one big thing which helped him was realizing that he could take the same set of chords he'd already learned and find other songs which just used those chords. This let him quickly and easily learn new songs and enjoy guitar more, and he turned this insight into the Chord Genome project, a database and search engine to help automatically find songs based on the chords they use. This means that you can simply put in the chords you know how to play, optionally filter by genre and decade, and get back a list of the songs you can play without needing to learn any new chords. It's one of those things that once you encounter it, you think, how did this not exist before? One thing I love about this project is the insights it can provide into music theory in a really practical and tangible way. For example, we talked about how a 3-chord song is often going to be using the 1, 4, and 5 chords in a key, for example, C, F, and G, or G, C, and D. But not necessarily, and that can be an interesting avenue to explore to see what other chords songwriters tend to use to write 3-chord songs. On the other hand, those 1, 4, 5, and 6 chords do go a long way. That's why we focus on them in our material for recognizing chords by ear at Musical U. And Austin said this also shows up in a feature of the Chord Genome project, where it suggests the most useful next chord for you to learn. If you tell the system what chords you know, it can tell you what one chord you could add next to unlock the greatest number of new songs. That's pretty cool. Austin has also written a fantastic blog post entitled 1,576 Easy Ukulele Songs That All Use the Same Beginner Chords, which leverages the database to show you how quickly you can get to a huge repertoire without needing to learn a huge number of chords. We also talked a bit about the ear skills that correspond to all this. Yes, it's cool to be able to jump straight to the chord chart for a new song you'll be able to play with the chords you already know. But what if you stopped one step earlier and just took the fact that the song only uses those chords, and then tried to figure out the progression yourself? You already know what chords are being used, so this provides a really great midway step to learning to recognize chords by ear, where you're having to identify the transition points where the chord changes, and figure out for yourself which chord comes next each time. But you're avoiding the need to recognize the set of chords yourself from scratch, and you're also avoiding tricky cases where a song is actually using chords you don't know yet. It's something we've put together song lists for at Musical U to help our members practice their chord by ear skills, and I love that there's now this powerful and flexible search engine they can use too. Austin also shared how immersing himself in this world of thinking about songs based on the chords they use, and having the theory fundamentals to understand how the progressions are put together, have allowed him to develop his own ear to figure out chords by ear. And so the Chord Genome project is also a great opportunity for what we call passive ear training, where you aren't doing drills and concrete training exercises, but instead you're using all kinds of musical listening experiences as opportunities to train your musical ear. The Chord Genome project is a super cool and useful website, and I'm sure you're itching to go and have a play. So just visit chordgenome.com or use the link we'll have in the show notes to this episode. And be sure to drop Austin a line and let him know how you get on. Thanks for listening to this episode, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's Musicality Podcast.